Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to a very interesting, very different kind of episode of Ask the CHOQ. Today, we're going to be talking about keto. Ooh, the dark side of keto. Yes. See, we got a few folks here already. Maybe some of y'all are wondering why I'm holding a guitar. It's because I'm going to see if I can't embarrass myself and prove that I, in fact, do not take myself seriously here in just a moment. How is everybody doing today? Hello, hello. Looks like we have a few people, about 6 people in here right now. If you are here, say hello in the chat if you can. Yeah. I do play a little bit of guitar. Hello, EMP. How you doing? I do play a small amount of guitar. Here and there, I'm a bit rusty, but I thought maybe I'd see if I could play the Imperial Death March for you guys here, metal style on my shred machine. I only learned it a couple hours ago, and I've already forgotten most of it, but we'll see. We'll see. What's up, Hunter, Daniel, CHOQ Gamer, EMP? How's everybody doing? Yeah. So I thought that maybe I would, like I said, prove that I, in fact, do not take myself seriously. Although I will say that I have quite a few studies here in front of me, very serious studies, lots and lots of research that is very serious. And I do take nutritional healing and nutritional science very seriously. But I thought maybe it would be fun because I don't think I can play the original Imperial Death March for you guys. Thought perhaps I would try to play it on guitar instead, knowing that would probably not trip the copyright violation algorithm on YouTube. So we'll see. We'll see. We shall see. Should I go ahead and give it a shot? Let's see here. Figured, maybe I could just do this while people were filing in. Yeah. Also, as usual, I'm doing this whole whiteboard thing. It's rather chaotic. My handwriting is horrible. So, it is what it is. So while we're waiting for people to come in, let's just see what happens if I attempt to play this and see if I can remember. Let's see here. All right. Let's just give it a shot here. Let's try it again. Not quite. Let's see if I remember the other part. Let's see. Not quite, right? Oh my God. All right. We're just gonna try it. We'll try it one more time. Maybe I'm just nervous. Let's see. Not quite. That was close. I did my best there. So hopefully you guys appreciate my attempt to very last minute learn something on guitar and barely practice it and play it in front of you. I suppose that shows that I do, in fact, have the capacity to embarrass myself live in front of people. So there you have it. Anyway, welcome to the dark side of keto. Let me go ahead and just put my shred machine down here and put on my my professional hat, so to speak. Well, yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you for bearing with me during that ridiculous introduction. My name is Dr. Matt Dorsey. I am the CHOQ Chief Scientific Officer and Formulator. I am a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And let me go ahead and just get my disclaimer out of the way right now. Don't forget disclaimer. I am not a medical doctor. Nothing I say today should be construed as any kind of medical advice. If you have any questions about your health, make sure to talk to a medical doctor or otherwise licensed healthcare practitioner. Yes, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully that takes care of that. All right, so we've got a lot of ground to cover today, folks. Let me just tell you a few things here. We're not going to talk about supplements at all today, not even a little bit. And one of the reasons for that is legal in general. Again, I don't want to connect any kind of supplementation to what we're talking about. I would rather just discuss everything 100% factually, and therefore we can actually talk about certain conditions like diabetes, things like that, as long as we're only talking about food and nutrition and we're not relating it back to any kind of product. So we will not be talking about supplements at all today, not even a little bit. Hold your questions till the end. We will have lots of time for a question and answer at the end. Pardon me. If you want to throw stuff in the chat until then, that's fine. I'm not going to be paying a lot of attention to the chat. I might occasionally, something might catch my eye. But for now, yes, it's just going to be sort of presentation mode. Yeah. Also, like I said before, I know this is totally ridiculous. My handwriting's not good. You can't even read half of this stuff. Most of this is for my benefit. But anyway, so if you can't read what's on here, no worries. It's all good. This is just doing my best with sort of a silly setup here. But you know, silliness and playing guitar notwithstanding, this is a very serious topic. Obviously, you know, I am a practitioner. I do see patients and clients, whatever you want to call them still. And this is an extremely popular diet that does have some benefits to it. And I will get to those benefits in a moment. But I have seen the dark side of keto many, many times in people. And I've had to save some people from it who were my clients. So this is a very, it's an area of a lot of passion for me. Let's just also get started by saying that, where is the disclaimer? The limits of research. So science is really, really complicated. And I would just like to say that research is limited in its scope of what it can accomplish. This gets into how to be a good scientist, how to be a good sense maker. So put it this way, within science, within research, we have this thing called the double-blind placebo-controlled clinical trial, right? And this comes from the pharmaceutical model, right? And what you do is you give somebody the active compound here, and then you give them the placebo here. And of course, you don't let them know which is which, and everybody's familiar with that. So with diet, you can't do that. You can't put every single one of someone's meals into capsules. That's impossible, right? So what's important to know is there could be massive placebo effects, placebogenic effects of our beliefs about nutrition on our physiology. I've referred to the effects of our beliefs and different emotional states on gene expression in the past on this show. And just know that increasingly we are finding that the way that we think about something has a massive impact on our physiology, and likely that it's very likely that a lot of that impact has to do with gene expression, epigenetics, genetic regulation. So unfortunately, when we're talking about all these different studies here, virtually all this research, there could be huge placebo effects. The only kinds of dietary research where you do get rid of placebo is on animals, right? So animal studies are obviously not optimal, right? Because animals, rats are different from humans, right? So are monkeys, et cetera, to some extent, but they're very similar. But just know that it's very possible there could be many, many different reasons why one person could get totally different results on a diet than another person. One of them is belief and placebo effects. For example, if you were raised in a very pro-meat family where you were raised to think that not having meat makes you weak and sick, then perhaps when you go on a vegan diet, you might be more likely to have negative effects. And vice versa, if you were raised in a vegan family where you were raised to think that meat is poisonous and toxic and horrible, then once you start eating meat, you might be more likely potentially to get negative effects from that. So belief, placebo, that's not even a metaphysical thing. That's hard science. We know that placebo is a big, big deal. So that's one limitation of the research. Another limitation, oh boy, there are so many, is also funding. Right? Who's funding this stuff? Sometimes you'll find pro-egg studies showing that eggs are really good for you. They're funded by the Egg Board. Studies showing that saturated fat isn't bad for you, funded by big butter and dairy. And, so that's another limitation, right? Another limitation is just that some of the stuff has not been studied thoroughly enough. No one has really put the time and effort into it, and the money, of course, as well, right? So, yeah, I don't want to paint a picture that we have figured everything out, because we certainly haven't. Also, it's important to know that due to genetic variation, it is certainly possible that because of how one's ancestors lived and the kinds of diets they survived on, and what their genes may have adapted to, that something like a ketogenic diet could potentially treat one person much better than another, that there very well could be genetic variation on that. The science on that is very, very new, and I don't really think that we have determined to what extent your genes, your inheritances affect how you respond to different ratios of macronutrients, such as the high-fat keto diet. So anyway, all right, a few disclaimers there. Bio-individuality, that's what I was talking about, right? Essentially that we are all very different. Our beliefs are different. Our genes are different. Our diseases are different. The things that are going on in our body biochemically are very different. We're all over the place, right? And even one person in their life can need different diets at different times in their life, depending on what's happening in their life. So if you have a woman, let's say, for example, and in one phase of her life, she is extremely healthy and, everything's going well for her, she could handle a certain diet that is more stress inducing, such as a ketogenic diet, versus perhaps at another time in that woman's life when she's just gotten through a divorce and perhaps has lost her job and has a lot of financial difficulties and a lot of stress. She might need a different kind of diet that is perhaps less rough on the adrenals, right? So even within one person's life, so the main thing is it's important to get away from this one-size-fits-all model that says that one diet is the best for every single person. There are certain things that are universal, but it's important not to make too many assumptions about there being one right way for everyone. And this is a good time for me to tell you guys also that I look at, some people call it the food wars. Anthony William calls it that, the food wars, right? If you go and you look at the paleo people over here and the vegan people over here, the paleo people are all about the low carb, high fat, high protein, lots of meat, keto, all that stuff. The vegan people obviously are more about low fat, higher carbs. They're very anti-meat, right? And I look at these two sides in nutrition as being like the Republicans and the Democrats of nutrition, right? And I consider myself an independent. So I am coming from the perspective of someone who is not completely on the paleo side and I'm not completely on the vegan side. I'm kind of in the middle, and I can, if you're familiar with those nutritional cultures and then the various nutritional subcultures underneath each one of them, then you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. If not, you might not fully understand what I just said. But if you go back and forth and you look at what's going on with both of those worlds, they talk a lot of smack about each other. They don't like each other. It's just a whole ridiculous thing. And by the way, I did make a playlist, and I'll publish it later on, specifically with a bunch of YouTube videos to accompany this, right? Videos on what we're talking about. And you will see some of that warfare that tribal warfare between the two sides in a couple of those videos. For example, Sean Baker, the physician who is all about eating nothing but meat, the carnivore physician, and then this guy, Mike, the vegan, right? They're all back and forth, right? Yeah. So anyway, let's see here. Somebody said they had trouble hearing. Is everyone else hearing okay? And let me know if there's any issues with the audio. I think it's just this one person, Chocolala. But anyway, so all right, onward. Steel manning. So in order to give a balanced representation of the data, and also to not be an extremist myself, obviously, yes, I called this special the dark side of keto. It's deliberately sort of a little bit over the top, right, in terms of being maybe, slightly controversial on purpose, because that's how you do marketing, right? Sure, let's be honest here. But obviously, keto wouldn't be so popular if it didn't get results, right? It's obviously fantastic for weight loss for a lot of people, right? That's not debated. I would never, ever debate that point. Keto obviously can be helpful for weight loss. And we're going to get to the roots of keto in a little bit here and talk about how really it comes from treating epilepsy. It was invented in the 1920s to treat epilepsy. So keto is a treatment for epilepsy. So yeah, I mean, the data on that is excellent. If there's somebody out there who has intractable epilepsy and they want to do the keto route, certainly that could be a good route, But there are obviously drawbacks. In terms of steel manning keto, I will say also that some people do report beneficial effects on their mood. So some of the benefits of keto include weight loss, sometimes beneficial effects on mood, sometimes the opposite. And that it obviously has a fantastic track record for, or when it comes to, when it comes to epilepsy, right? So a while back, they noticed that people who were in the fasting state had fewer seizures, right? So fewer seizures in the fasting state. And there were some physicians who thought, well, is there a way we could mimic not eating, but still get someone calories, right? Is there a way to do that? And lo and behold, they came up with the idea of keto, because what happens is your body is looking at the amount of carbohydrates coming in, and it's basing the carbohydrate intake. It's basing that it's using that as its assessment of whether or not you're actually eating, right? And if your carbs go below a certain amount and your insulin secretion goes below a certain amount, then what happens is your body thinks that you don't have any food, and certain mechanisms kick on. There's a study right here. Ketosis and brain handling of glutamate, glutamine, and GABA. So the hypothesis here is that one of the mechanisms of the anti-epileptic effect of the ketogenic diet, meaning that it treats epilepsy, is to alter brain handling of glutamate. You guys have likely heard me talk about glutamate before. It's an excitatory neurotransmitter. It tends to make people feel, when it's excessive, stressed out, and is associated with things like OCD, anxiety. And it is, because it's excitatory, right? Lowering it does help with seizures, right? Because seizures, epilepsy, it's a form of basically overstimulation of the brain. And there is a hypothesis here that that is how keto does help with epilepsy, right? Again, just a hypothesis, but yes, that is part of the deal. So, some of the mood improvements that people are getting when they're doing keto could be a result of it lowering excess glutamate. If you want to learn more about glutamate, you can also look at Boyd Haley's work, because he has shown, Boyd Haley, he has shown that glutamate is increased with mercury. So mercury has the ability to knock out glutamate metabolizing enzymes and can raise glutamate levels. And that is associated very strongly also with Alzheimer's and things like that. So, yeah. All right, moving on. All right, so if if you want to know about keto and what it's actually doing, it's important to identify two completely opposite states of consciousness, two opposite states of physiology, the fed state and the fasting state. Essentially, as we said, keto was, it's being exploited for its treatment of epilepsy because it's mimicking the fasting state, right? So it's mimicking fasting. So a little bit of basic physiology here. Insulin, this is the hormone secreted by your pancreas that helps to get your glucose out of the blood and into your cells, right? So when we talk about diabetes, we talk about insulin dysfunction, right? Insulin insensitivity, and where that insulin is not working at the cellular level. So here's your cell, here's the blood, you have glucose floating in the blood. It goes inside the cell when insulin opens up the door, right? And then it gets converted to energy, also known as ATP. So when you are fed, your insulin, goes up to then get that glucose into the cell. When you're fasting, you tend to have lower levels of insulin and higher levels of its opposite, called glucagon. Glucagon basically does the opposite. It does things like, I don't get too technical here, but gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis. But essentially, long story short, this initiates the process of generating fresh glucose from either glycogen, right? So that's going to be your glycogenolysis, right? Which is a stored form of glucose, right? It's stored especially in the liver and the muscles, things like that. So this does the opposite again. So this takes the glucose. This is like, we have lots of glucose. We're going to get rid of it, put it in the cell so it can be converted to ATP. This is like, we don't have enough glucose. So we're going to actually increase production of glucose from our glycogen stores in the case of glycogenolysis, or in the case of what they call gluconeogenesis, we're going to actually convert amino acids and things like that. You can break down muscle tissue when you're in the fasting state to basically use amino acids to then use them as a precursor to create fresh glucose. But glucose is very, very important for your body. And so we have all these exquisite mechanisms of how to regulate glucose. By the way, you do need to keep your blood sugar in a very, very tight range to feel normal and to have normal physiological functioning. And so we have these exquisite mechanisms in the body of, like I said, of how to regulate glucose very tightly. Yes. So now here are two other terms that might be familiar to some of y'all: anabolic and catabolic. This just means that you're building up tissues. This means that you're breaking down tissues. In the fed state, insulin is your number one most anabolic hormone. A lot of people in the keto world are operating on this idea that insulin really just what it does is it just makes you gain weight, makes you put fat on. And therefore, when you do keto and you reduce your insulin levels, then everything's all good, right? Well, insulin does a lot more than that. It's a very, very anabolic hormone. It helps you actually build muscle tissue, in fact, and has a wide variety of other effects. It also helps non-glucose nutrients like fat and protein get into cells as well. In general, when you're fasting, you're catabolic. Now think about what I was talking about earlier with glucagon, right? This guy right here. Hello, Seraphim. How you doing? Glucagon right here, again, being the opposite of insulin. This is a very yin-yang opposite thing, insulin, glucagon, right? Glucagon is catabolic. Now, why is that? So again, remember we were talking about insulin helps to build up tissues. Glucagon in the fasting state, they help to break down tissues. Part of what's called gluconeogenesis, this again, like I said, involves taking things like muscle tissue, breaking it down into amino acids, and then converting that to glucose, right? So that is part of this catabolic process. So it's more of a breaking down. Now, there is some research out there showing that that keto actually is not particularly great for putting on muscle mass. And the reason for that is because keto produces a low insulin because it's fasting mimicking. Remember, keto is fasting mimicking. It's anti-insulin. It's lowering insulin. Insulin is anabolic. Therefore, you actually are at a disadvantage putting on muscle. And in fact, we do have, I won't go through, I don't have too many studies to go through all of them, but here's one. By the way, later on, I will post all of these studies. So look for that in the comments in the description. This one right here, ketogenic diet and sport, possible marriage. They do talk a little bit about in here about keto might not be optimal for muscle building. Let's see here. It is an oxymoron when the athlete seeks muscle hypertrophy, referring to the ketogenic diet. It appears somewhat contradictory. There is widespread use of the ketogenic diet in bodybuilders during bulk-up periods, while all data regarding biochemical and molecular mechanisms suggest that it is very difficult to increase muscle mass during a ketogenic diet. And here's why. Use of which should be limited to the few days immediately before or after competition bodybuilding. Yeah. And remember, ketogenic diet blunts not just insulin, but also insulin-like growth factor 1, IGF-1, which is another anabolic compound, and reduces the possibility of gaining muscle despite having plenty of calories. So that's one example. Here's another interesting one. International Society of Sports Nutrition Position Stand, Diets and Body Composition, 2017 study. They do mention that there's not really enough research on this, and there needs to be a lot more as of 4 years ago. But they do say, let's see here. The high-fat diet increased fat oxidation, but also lowered pyruvate dehydrogenase activity. Sorry, I didn't mean to actually read that part. That was probably just for me. Showing that there are, in fact, some indications that ketogenic diet can reduce sports performance. Anyway, you actually can read the study in the description later on if you want to. At the same time, also, they did find, incidentally, and this is a slightly off topic, but it is important, that the main reason that the ketogenic diet works after doing a literature review is that it just reduces your appetite. That's really how the ketogenic diet actually helps you lose weight. It simply reduces appetite. And we'll get into the evidence for that in just a little bit. Yeah. But yeah, so, all right. Anyway, what is next? Okay, so moving on. Again, when you are fed versus fasting. So let me just zoom out for a second. Your biology is optimized for survival. All biology is. It's all about how to survive, right? So your biology has to have different modes, different gears it can shift into, depending on how abundant food is in your environment, right? And so again, remember, let's go back to the roots. Keto was designed to mimic the fasting state, to trick your body, essentially, right? Trick your body. So keto is a form of pseudo fasting, to trick your body into fasting. Low carb intake tricks the body. And again, remember, I have horrible handwriting and also poor color choice as well. So if this looks like garbage, then just know that I fully realize that. But anyway, low carb intake tricks the body. Ketones. So the word ketogenic comes from the idea of ketones. Ketone is this alternate source of energy, right? They are produced in the mitochondria, and they come from fatty acids and amino acids. This is what happens when you go into a very, very low carbohydrate state. And we'll get into what I mean by very and the actual math there in terms of ratios, macronutrient ratios. But ketones, they come, your immune system, your body can actually take fat and also amino acids and create ketones. And it does this whenever all of your glucose is super low and all of your glycogen, which is the stored form of glucose, is depleted. Yeah, so that's where keto comes from, these compounds called ketones. This is also the reason that people on keto can have really horrible breath. And it's also the reason, interesting enough, that sometimes people on keto can actually have a false positive on a breathalyzer test because these ketones are pretty weird. Acetone is actually one of them. If you ever used fingernail polish remover, you know what acetone smells like. Well, the body can actually produce that as a metabolic consequence of producing ketones. All right, next page. All right. By the way, the ketones being produced by mitochondria, that is significant for reasons we'll get into later. All right. So here are some graphs, some very ugly graphs that I made. This is actually just really important for anybody who's interested in nutrition. If you want to know nutrition basics, aside from the whole keto thing, pay attention right now. This is just educational, foundational information I don't know why I said educational. This is foundational information on nutrition. This has to do with macronutrients. And just to be, real basic, like macronutrient, that means either fat, carbs, or protein, essentially anything that has calories, energy that can be converted into ATP in the cell and used as energy by the body is considered a macronutrient, whereas a micronutrient is, say, for example, a mineral or a vitamin, something like that. Anyway, so macros, yes. So let me give you some examples using these awfully drawn pie graphs here of different macronutrient ratios so you can understand what the keto diet is, what it is. And there are all different versions of these. I'm just giving you one version of each of these. What would be considered a very low fat and high carbohydrate diet would be this: 70% carbohydrates, 10% fat, and 20% protein, right? Remember, the pie graph can only be split up three ways. You only have three kinds of macronutrient, right? Protein, carbs, and fat. So yes, so 20% protein. So this would be considered a very low fat and high carbohydrate diet. Medium everything, right? Kind of just in the middle would be like 35% carbs, 35% fat, and 30% protein. This might be closer to what a lot of people eat. Those Pac-Man drawings are ugly. That's hilarious. Yes, these drawings are intentionally ugly. I wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you, Jimmy Jack 35. I appreciate your feedback there. And finally, very high fat, low carb. This is keto right here. Now, notice this tiny little sliver right here. This is all your carbs on keto. Keto is usually 4% of your calories typically on keto are coming from carbohydrates. 4%. Very, very, very low a percentage. 70% fat, sometimes as high as 80 something percent fat. So mostly fat, most of your calories come from fat. And then 26% protein, sometimes, like I said, less than that, right? So again, we have a total inversion. On a high carb diet, we would have mostly carbs, obviously, and then, high fat diet. It's just basically inverted, right? 70% fat, 70% carbs. So again, you have to take your carbs down really, really low, though, really low. Notice how nothing else anywhere here is 4%. Lowest we have here is 10% fat, but 4% is very, very low to where you're getting hardly any carbohydrates. And when you do that, again, that's what switches on the starvation physiology that is the essence of keto. It is mimicking starvation. Now, mimicking starvation, does that sound like a good idea? Well, maybe, I don't know. But, all right, this next part would get slightly technical. This is really important, though. There are three kinds of ways primarily to measure someone's blood sugar or measure insulin function, whatever you want to call it, right? So I'm going to have to break this down really fast for you. So when you go to, get blood work done, typically these first two are going to be really common. This third one is going to be a lot less common, but they're very different, and it's really important to know the differences about them. So hemoglobin A1C. This is an average of your blood sugar, how much glucose is in your blood. That's about a 2 to 3 month average, right? So this is actually really nice because this is giving you, instead of just giving you one snapshot at one moment, it's telling you an average. This is very commonly used. There's also fasting glucose, where you don't eat anything since the night before, and then you go in and they just look at how much glucose, the amount that's in your blood in that exact moment. That's fasting glucose. These are both very common. There's a less common one called the glucose tolerance test. Now, notice how these are checks and these have an X. I'll get into why that is, because it has to do with, if you're on keto, how you will fail or pass these tests. So the glucose tolerance test is completely different. It's also called a glucose challenge. What this test does is it actually has you drink a whole bunch of pure glucose, and then later on it tests your blood sugar to see how much of your how much glucose your body was able to actually get rid of from the blood and put into the cell, where it can then be converted to energy. This is an estimate of how well insulin is working, because remember what we said before, insulin is the signaling molecule that opens the cells up so that glucose can come in from the blood and then get converted to energy, right? So now, why is it important to make a distinction between these? Okay, so here's the deal. People who are on keto, one of the benefits of keto is that it obviously helps to lower your blood sugar, right? This is what certain people call flatlining your blood glucose. There is a very important distinction here that is lost on almost everyone who is a proponent of keto. If you don't have any carbohydrates actually coming in because you're eating such a low carb diet, what effectively happens is, of course, your A1C, the average, or the fasting glucose, the snapshot, those are going to go down, right? And let's say you start off with diabetes, and then all of a sudden you do a keto diet. It's going to look like in a sense, you are fixing the diabetes in a particular sense of if you define diabetes as high blood sugar or not, right? But if you define diabetes as glucose tolerance, how well you can actually handle glucose, the keto diet actually not only fails that, but it actually makes it worse. So depending on how you actually define diabetes, keto can either improve diabetes or can actually significantly worsen diabetes. If you define diabetes as the ability of your body to handle carbohydrates, the ability of your cells to get carbs out of the blood and convert them to energy, then the evidence actually shows that, in fact, that's not what's happening at all on keto. So there's information that says that people who are on a high-fat diet will actually fail the glucose tolerance test. So let's get into that really fast. So, all right. As far back as 1934, this has been known for a long time. Dietetic factors influence the glucose tolerance and activity of insulin. So this is very, very early preliminary research, but the point here is just that we have actually known about some of this for almost 100 years, like 80, 90 years. In this, they were actually able to show that, this is on animals, by the way, that you're actually able to, if you give more fat to an animal, then that animal will have a harder time using carbohydrates. The fat in the diet, higher amounts of fat, impedes the body's ability to actually use glucose, and you get higher blood sugar spikes as a result of that fat. Check this out. So experiments show that on the carbohydrate diet, 1/2 unit of insulin exerts a more rapid and profound effect upon the blood sugar than when the animal is receiving a fat diet. Let's see here. Let me find a better one for you here. Actually, you know what? We have better research, but that's just very preliminary. That's on animals. Let's get to the next one. Oh, so many here. All right. Okay. This is actually, before we get to the research, I thought this was funny. This was on a message board. It's a keto message board. And it was saying, you can get a false fail on an glucose tolerance test if you've been consistently low carbing for a while prior. So people who've been doing a low carb or keto diet know that if you do a glucose tolerance test, you will fail it. And the claim here was that it was a false fail. There is no such thing as a false fail. Either you can handle carbohydrates properly or you can't. I just thought that was funny. But yeah, so, all right, what's next? Let's see here. The process by which a high-fat diet can alter your insulin function and destroy your glucose tolerance. That one word for that is lipotoxicity, effects of dietary saturated fat and trans fatty acids here. So check this out. This was from 2013. High saturated fat intake. So saturated fats are particularly implicated here. Typical dietary pattern of Western populations favors a pro-inflammatory status and contributes to the development of insulin resistance. Increased lipid availability reduces insulin-stimulated glucose consumption in skeletal muscle. So yeah, there's one there. And what's next here? Here's an interesting rat study. Insulin sensitivity and glucose tolerance are altered by maintenance on a ketogenic diet. So again, obviously caveat, this was a rat study, but 8 weeks of consuming a ketogenic diet basically led to alteration of glucose levels during a glucose challenge. Consumption of a high carbohydrate meal in rats that habitually consumed a ketogenic diet significantly increased insulin and glucose levels over an extended period of time. Translation, English translation, if you eat a high-fat diet, then you will have a larger blood sugar spike from the same amount of carbohydrates. These data suggest that maintenance on a ketogenic diet negatively affects glucose homeostasis, an effect that is rapidly reversed upon cessation of the diet. So, and we'll get into some human studies here in a second, but this is a rat study showing that basically if you fed rats a ketogenic diet for a while, then you gave them a normal amount of carbohydrates, they would have an abnormally high negative reaction to those carbohydrates. And then if you get them off the keto diet for a while and you put them on a normal diet that doesn't have excessive amounts of fat, then all of a sudden their insulin function is repaired and goes back to normal. All right, here's another one. Mechanisms underlying skeletal muscle insulin resistance induced by fatty acids, importance of mitochondrial function. This is a study from 2012. Here we reviewed experimental evidence supporting the involvement of each of these propositions in the development of skeletal muscle insulin resistance induced by saturated fatty acids and proposed an integrative model placing mitochondrial dysfunction as an important and common factor to other mechanisms. So essentially what this is saying is that high amounts of fat, particularly high amounts of saturated fat from animals, tends to cause a disruption of mitochondrial function, leading to impaired carbohydrate tolerance and impaired insulin function. Yeah. Hopefully I'm not losing you guys. I know it's getting kind of technical here. So what else we got here? Fatty acids were demonstrated to reduce mitochondrial function through induction of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Several studies have shown that mitochondrial content, function, and oxidative capacity are decreased in insulin-resistant obese and type 2 diabetic individuals, which is, of course, worsened by high fat. And what do we got here? Chronic elevation of circulating fatty acid levels reduces the expressions of genes involved in mitochondrial biogenesis, oxidative capacity, and increased production of free radicals, impairing mitochondrial biogenesis and function. So essentially what this paper is saying is that excessive amounts of fat in the diet can actually have a lot of negative effects on mitochondrial function and insulin function. Yeah. So, all right. Hopefully that's not too over the top of you guys. Okay. So what do we got next here? On the flip side, this will kind of blow your mind. High carbohydrate, high fiber diets for insulin-treated men with diabetes mellitus. Here we go. These studies suggest that high carbohydrate diets may be the dietary therapy of choice for certain patients with maturity onset type of diabetes. Really? So you can actually reverse diabetes on a low-fat, high carbohydrate diet? That sounds crazy. Huh, weird. What's up with that? We'll get more into that in a second. All right. So again, like I was saying, key concept here is that fat reduces insulin function. There's something called IMCL, also known as intramyocellular lipid, also called ectopic fat. Now, what the heck does that mean? So let me put it this way. You can produce on a very high-fat diet, such as keto, an effect where you have excessive amounts of fat stored inside of your cells, specifically the muscle cells. So inside of muscle cellular cell. I just realized I misspelled cellular. Lipid fat, right? So you have ectopic just means something that is where it's not supposed to be, like an ectopic pregnancy, right? Which is outside the uterus. So essentially what happens is high saturated fat diet, especially again, we'll get into how keto with meat is completely different from keto without meat. It's the meat heavy keto diets that actually show the worst effects, by the way. But yeah, how high amounts of saturated fat, particularly from again from animal fat, tends to accumulate in the muscle cells, and then that actually blocks glucose uptake and utilization. This blocks, so when this fat accumulates from a high fat diet in the muscle cell, it blocks the uptake of glucose and it disrupts insulin function. Remember, again, just so y'all know, insulin is the hormone that gets the glucose out of the blood and then into the cell. Yeah. All right. Whew. What is next? Dang, so much here. Okay. So what's really fascinating is the fact that you can actually reverse diabetes on a high carb diet. I am not even kidding. This will blow your mind. You can reverse diabetes on a high carbohydrate diet. And when I say high carbohydrate, remember, high carb is the same as low fat, and high fat is the same as low carb. Because a lot of the time the protein's not changing too much, and there's only 3 things that make up that pie graph, right? Fat, carbs, protein for your macronutrient ratios, right? So track with me here really fast. When you take the fat down, the fat levels down in your diet, you actually start to fix the problem. You fix the insulin resistance from the high fat, and it then enables your cells to increase their ability to then use glucose and take it up from the blood. Let me repeat that. You can, if you take the fat levels down low enough and then you increase the carbs, and obviously I'm talking about quality whole food carbs, not junk carbs, right? We're talking about fruits and vegetables and whole grains, things like that, right? Beans, legumes. You can actually fix the problem. So there are entire systems out there. One of them is called Mastering Diabetes. There are entire systems out there that actually use low fat, high, healthy carbohydrate meal styles of eating, diets, to repair and insulin function and reverse diabetes. So I don't have enough time to go into all of it right now. If you want to learn more, check out this book called Mastering Diabetes. It's also an organization. This guy, Cyrus Kambata, PhD. He is a PhD in nutritional biochemistry. This is a whole system. It is a plant-based system. And like I said before, I am neither on the vegan nor the paleo side, so I'm not personally plant-based, right? But just know that essentially, long story short, though, when it comes to actually fixing diabetes, the plant-based approach is infinitely superior to the high meat keto approach. That's just a fact at this point. And the reason for that is that you're actually fixing the problem. You can have, when you take your fats down low enough and you actually repair and you get rid of all this stuff that's impairing your insulin function, you can then have as many bananas per day as you want, because your cells will then actually clear the carbs and transform them into ATP. So by any proper definition of what diabetes actually is, keto does not treat diabetes at all. It lowers the blood sugar, but as soon as you put a normal amount of carbs in, you have a distorted hyperreaction essentially to it, right? Whereas these styles of eating, much, much better, because not only does it lower your A1C, lower your fasting glucose, but you will actually pass an oral glucose tolerance test because you have actually fixed the problems on a cellular level, whereas keto is actually making those problems worse. Actually, so let that sink in. Keto is actually causing cellular dysfunction through intramyocellular lipid accumulation. And again, there's some of the studies I went through are much more detailed. I only have so much time, but again, I will be posting all of the studies in the description. There'll be a link to download all of them, and you can review them for yourself if you like. But yes, so this is what happens. And again, it is well known within the keto community that if you do a glucose tolerance test, right? We're seeing how well your body can get glucose out of the blood and convert it to energy. People on keto will fail that, which means that that's not actually healing you. It's actually making you worse and covering up the fact that it's making you worse is what's really happening. Just FYI. So, yeah, it is mind-blowing to most people when I tell them that I, as somebody who sees clients, when I have somebody who needs to have their blood sugar lowered because it's too high, I don't actually decrease their carbs. In fact, I increase their carbs. I make sure they're on quality carbs, and I actually decrease their fat intake, particularly from animal fat. Not that they have to be vegan, but just much less meat. And that actually fixes the problem where then you can use carbs. So again, if you're on a certain diet and that diet makes it to where you can't have a normal amount of carbs without having an exaggerated reaction, that's not a healthy diet. Not at all. All right. Whew. You guys still with me? I know this is getting pretty intense. Doing my best here. All right. So again, just to hammer home this important point, lowering blood glucose is not the same as actually healing insulin dysfunction. So do you guys get the difference between these two, right? Insulin dysfunction, which is what happens in diabetes and prediabetes. This means that basically insulin, again, being the molecule that tells your cells to take glucose from the blood and use that glucose for energy. This is dysfunctional in diabetes, right? This is why your blood sugar goes up, because your cells can't get sugar out of the blood. There's nothing wrong with having plenty of carbs coming into your body as long as your cells can use those carbs and get them out of the blood. When the carbs go too high, carbohydrate is a very reactive fuel. It causes molecular damage, causes what they call advanced glycation end products, AGEs, causes lots of problems, right? So again, if you're not actually healing insulin dysfunction, then the diet you're on is not actually reversing your diabetes. It's just covering it up. So essentially what's happening with keto is you have the illusion that you're actually fixing diabetes when you're not. You're just simply not. You can lower your blood glucose, right? And in a sense, that seems great, right? But what's actually happening is you still have insulin dysfunction. You just don't have a need for insulin because you don't have any carbohydrates coming in. As soon as, again, somebody on a high-fat diet, as soon as you give them a banana or an apple or some kind of healthy carbohydrates, they're going to have a massive, massive spike, carbohydrate spike, blood sugar spike, because keto actually induces insulin dysfunction while covering up the fact that it's actually inducing insulin dysfunction. So this is maddening that not more people actually know this. All right. So carbohydrate intolerance is another way of putting it. Ketogenic diet, high-fat diet induces carbohydrate intolerance. So as long as you never have any carbs, you could be fine. Now, is that a good idea? Probably not. Probably not. Yeah. And this is that guy, Cyrus Kambata, PhD. Definitely check out his work. And someone was just asking about type 1 diabetes. JJ, if you want to know more, Cyrus Kambata, PhD, really interesting guy. He himself has type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is the kind of diabetes where there has been an autoimmune process by which your body, your pancreas, can no longer manufacture insulin. Once your body can't manufacture insulin, you have to inject insulin for the rest of your life, right? Very different from type 2 diabetes. I won't get into that, which is the more common form. But type 1, more rare form, autoimmune. And what's happening is, again, your body can't make any insulin, right? Now, JJ, what's interesting about this guy is that Cyrus Kambata, his story is that he got type 1 diabetes. He tried a bunch of different diets, including like a super high fat, high protein, low carb, keto, paleo type of diet. And eventually he actually figured out through studying some stuff that a low fat, high carbohydrate diet was actually the healthiest way for him to eat as a type 1 diabetic. And your metric for how well your system is functioning if you're a type 1 diabetic is how many units of insulin you have to inject per day. So it's very easy to quantify how well a certain diet is working, because if the diet is working well, you don't have to inject as much insulin. And he actually found that a high whole food carbohydrate, low fat diet, which sounds crazy again, right? High carb, low fat, was actually the best for his type 1 diabetes. And he thought, how is this even possible? So he actually went to school and got a PhD in nutritional biochemistry and founded Mastering Diabetes simply because he wanted to figure out, hey, what's actually going on? So he actually did his dissertation on this kind of stuff and has written books about it and has a whole program about it. So yes, very important. So, all right. Now, so we talked about blood sugar and how keto actually is not really the best for blood sugar. Now we're going to get into obesity. Keto, like I said before, I was trying to steel man keto, meaning like trying to build it up and trying to, show what is good about keto. Obviously, keto is excellent for weight loss in the sense that, it certainly works, right? It is pretty predictable, right? So get a little technical here. There's something called the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. And this is something that people in the keto world have typically prescribed or subscribed to. What does this say? So this is an explanation, a theory, or perhaps a hypothesis of why keto works. Insulin, as we mentioned before, toward the beginning of this show, we said that insulin is a very anabolic hormone. Proponents of keto, what they will say is that insulin, because it's very anabolic and it increases tissue production, right? It increases fat. And when your carbs go really low, because you're on a low carb diet, you don't need very much insulin, right? Because like low carbs, your body's like, there's hardly any carbs coming in. We don't need any insulin. So the keto theory of how it helps you lose weight is called the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity, meaning that when your carbs go low, your insulin goes low. Insulin is a fat promoting hormone, right? And therefore you lose weight. Now this has been actually completely disproven, and I'll go over the research here. It's really interesting. So first, let's start with this, a review of the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. This was from 2017, so fairly recently. And all of this, by the way, comes from the same researcher. His name is Kevin Hall. So yeah, we'll get into Dr. Hall in a second. It's kind of an interesting drama here. But anyway, so all right. The carbohydrate insulin model of obesity posits that diets with a high proportion of carbohydrate elevate insulin secretion and thereby suppress the release of fatty acids from adipose tissue into circulation and direct circulating fat toward adipose storage, blah, blah, blah. So essentially it's, like I said, just a more technical way of what I was saying. Yes. All right. The carbohydrate insulin model provides a plausible explanation of why insulin therapy tends to cause weight gain in people with diabetes. People with diabetes inject insulin, they tend to gain weight. So that's kind of like part of the, oh yeah, there must be something about insulin and making gain weight. Now this section is interesting. Experimental falsification of the carbohydrate insulin model. Let's see here. Recently, 2 metabolic ward studies directly tested the logical consequences of the carbohydrate insulin model in humans. So what is a metabolic ward study? Well, if you want to get real nerdy about nutrition science, again, like I was saying earlier about the limitations of science, it's very hard to control someone's diet. Very, very hard, right? A lot of these studies, they're just telling people to eat a certain way, and then they have them check in every few weeks. Not a good way to do it because you really don't know what people are eating. In a metabolic ward study, they actually keep people for multiple weeks or however long the study's for in a metabolic ward, right, in a hospital, and they control every single thing they eat. The person has no control over what they're eating. They're given a certain meal that's calculated to have an exact number of different nutrients, and they have to eat exactly all of it, nothing more, nothing less than what they're given. So this is very, very tightly controlled feeding studies. All right, it's called a controlled feeding study. There should be an S right here. Controlled feeding studies. All right, so now there have been studies, multiple studies, where what they did was they had 2 groups, right? One group was more of a keto style diet. Remember our macronutrient ratios, right? Where you've got high amounts of fat, low amounts of carbs, with keto. And then another version usually will be inverted, higher carbs, lower fat, something like that, right? opposite type diets. And another important term here, if you want to get real technical, is isocaloric. Isocaloric, what does that mean? Well, in the high fat, low carb and the high carb, low fat, it's the same number of calories. So let's say they picked 2,200 calories, right? That means that no matter what the ratio of carbs to fat or protein is, everyone is getting the same number of calories in each group. There's this idea, people say a calorie is a calorie. Actually, a calorie is not a calorie, by the way, and we'll get into why. But they say a calorie is a calorie, that the old school, now outdated model of weight loss, which has some reality, but is that all calories are the same. And then if you reduce your number of calories, whether it's less fat, less protein, whether it's carbohydrates, that you're going to lose weight. That is actually not true at all. And we'll get into why. But the theory of this model is that if you have the same number of calories in a keto diet versus a higher carb diet, even though the same number of calories, you're going to lose more weight on the keto diet. That's what this concept predicts, this carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. Yeah. Rather, despite the reduction in insulin secretion, these studies found less body fat loss during the carbohydrate restricted diets compared with an isocaloric higher carbohydrate diet with identical protein. So again, what these studies are doing, and I have, I've got three of them right here. We're going to go into what these studies are doing is they're comparing two diets, same number of calories in both diets. One diet has more of a keto flair to it, right? High fat, low carb. The other diet, same number of calories because it has more carbs, less fat, and the same amount of protein as well. They're controlling for protein, same percentage of calories from protein, right? And what's really interesting is, so we've got this whole saga with this guy named Kevin Hall, Dr. Hall. And actually, I think that's on the next slide here, quote unquote slide. Let's see. Here we go. All right. Nope, not on this one. Anyway, well, we'll get to it. So Kevin Hall is a researcher. Actually, I think it's on this next one here. So organized. Boy, am I organized. I'll tell you what. My middle name. Yeah, Kevin Hall, PhD. Okay, so this is a nutritional researcher, works at the National Institute of Diabetes, Digestion, and Kidney Disorders, or kidney diseases. This guy was contracted by an organization that was a pro-keto organization called NUSI, Nutritional Science Institute. This organization was started by a guy named Gary Taubes. He was a guy who wrote a bunch of books about how carbs are bad and, fat's the new thing, right? It's a pro-low carb group, basically. And what's fascinating is that the research that Dr. Hall did that was put on by this pro-keto, pro-low carb group actually completely contradicted the low carb concepts, the crucial low carb concepts. Let's go through these. So we've got three studies from Dr. Hall from 2015, 2016, and 2017 here. Here is the first study. Calorie for calorie dietary fat restriction results in more body fat loss than carbohydrate restriction in people with obesity. Well, that's interesting. I will say, again, a lot of these studies are highly limited. This study was only done for about 6 days, so really not the best study, to be frank. This is just the first of 3 studies, though. So Hall and his group at the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases at NIH. Here's what they say in their abstract. Whereas carbohydrate restriction led to sustained increases in fat oxidation and loss of 53 grams of body fat per day, fat oxidation was unchanged by fat restriction, leading to 89 grams of fat loss and was significantly greater than carbohydrate restriction. So essentially 53 grams of body fat loss per day on the low carb and 89 grams of body fat loss per day on the low fat, high carb diet. Several days of the RF diet led to a steady fat imbalance, equivalently 89, significantly greater than the steady state of body fat loss at 500. Well, sorry, it's a bit, okay, this one's a bit obtuse, but essentially here's the deal. If you cut 840 calories of fat per day, you lose 90 grams approximately of body fat per day. But if you cut the same number, 840 calories of carbohydrates, you'll only lose about 50. So approximately 90 versus 50, or like 89 versus 52, 53, something like that. So essentially, you can cut the same number of calories from one or another macronutrient and lose different amounts of body fat. That's fascinating. Here's another one. This is same group. This is 2016. Energy expenditure and body composition changes after an isocaloric ketogenic diet in overweight and obese men. Now, this one was actually 8 weeks, so a lot better than the last study. The last one was only 6 days. Body fat loss slowed during the ketogenic diet and coincided with increased protein utilization and loss of free fat mass. That's interesting. Again, supported by the Nutrition Sciences Initiative, this pro-low carb group. Let's see what else do they have to say in this one. Actually, no, we're going to get to the next one. The next one's the really interesting one. All right. Yeah. 2017. Obesity energetics, body weight regulation, the effects of diet composition, also Kevin D. Hall. This was a review of a bunch of different similar studies called a meta-analysis, where they looked at 32 different studies. They're all controlled feeding studies. Again, controlled feeding study means you're in a metabolic ward. They're controlling everything. You have to eat every single thing on your plate, nothing more, nothing less than what they give you to eat. And everything has been endlessly calculated to where they know the exact number of calories from fat, protein, and carbohydrates in everything you eat. 32 different studies that were similar, comparing a high or a low carb diet, right? And what does it say here? Our meta-analysis of 32 controlled feeding studies with isocaloric substitution of carbohydrate for fat found that both energy expenditure and fat loss were greater with lower fat diets. Wow, fascinating. So again, a review of 32 different studies showed that when you control for calories, what's happening is you're actually losing more weight when you lower your fat, not when you increase it. So how does the ketogenic diet actually help you lose weight? Long story short, it just makes you less hungry. So you just eat less. That's pretty much it. That's really the actual real mechanism of action, is that what keto does is it messes up your appetite. And when you eat less, you just don't gain it. You lose weight. That's essentially what it does. It just alters your appetite. That is really the only hypothesis that makes any sense given these isocaloric studies. And remember, not only are they isocaloric, but they're also controlling for protein. So they're only manipulating the ratios of carbohydrates and fat. All right. So hopefully I haven't lost you guys yet. I know it's getting kind of intense. Just get some more water here. So yeah, what is next? Oh boy. I know this is a little more dense and a little less fun than usual material, but hey, there you have it. So remember, the whole purpose of ketogenic in the first place is to mimic starvation, to mimic fasting, right? What it's doing is it's tricking your body. Hunter says, I still got you. Thank God. All right, cool. Glad you're with me. So track with me as best you can. And we will have Q&A at the end, as well as we will be giving away prizes like usual. So obviously, a little more intense, a little more serious today than usual. That's why I started off with my ridiculous guitar routine. We will give away prizes and have Q&A at the end, so feel free to ask me whatever you like then for clarification. So fed versus fasting. So which of these is more stressful, you think? What's more stressful, having food or not having food? Right? So again, remember, keto is you're not literally starving on keto. You have plenty of calories. You have enough to function. But because your body relies on carbohydrate input to determine whether or not it is in fact hungry or starving, or whether there's enough calories coming in, it's using carbs for that purpose. Again, the reason that keto works so well for epilepsy is because being in a fasting state alters your neurochemistry in favor of reducing certain excitatory neurotransmitters like glutamate, and that's what reduces epilepsy, what gets rid of the seizures. So again, remember, keto is mimicking fasting. So which is more stressful, being fed or fasting? Obviously fasting, right? So just a few areas that are affected by stress. And I know we talk a lot about stress hormones and cortisol, all the time. And again, of course, I'm not talking about supplements today for legal reasons because I want to be uncensored about all this. And as long as I'm talking about food and not supplements, it's all good. Anyway, but yeah, heart, brain, reproductive system. Let's just know that there are certain parts of the body that are very, very sensitive to stress. Let's talk a little bit about cortisol. Again, I also want to say that we don't have enough research to know 100% what's actually happening in all these areas. There's just insufficient evidence in some of these areas, for sure, I will say. So, yeah, with respect to especially this next part, there are mixed results on this, I'll tell you right now. But let's talk about hormones, because I know CHOQ Nation is fascinated with all that stuff. We do know that there's a huge fertility epidemic because of all of the chemicals. Ostensibly, that's the big reason anyways, the chemicals in the food and the water, the pesticides, all that stuff. Its negative effects on the endocrine system. There is a fertility crisis. We have all sorts of issues going on with the human endocrine and reproductive systems. So this is an area that I think that you guys obviously probably are very, very concerned with. All right. So now let's talk a little bit about some of going back to epilepsy. Remember, we have a lot of research on keto for epilepsy. It has a great track record for treating epilepsy. And so we do have some data on what it does to people, who are epileptic, who go on a ketogenic diet. The ketogenic diet for intractable epilepsy in adults, preliminary results. Older paper, 1999. This is a very, very small study, only 11 people. Let's see what we got here. So, I will say like the seizure decrease was significant. 50 to 90% decrease in seizure frequency. That's huge, right? So obviously it was doing what it was supposed to be doing. Serum cholesterol and triglycerides increased. That's one thing. And what else happened? Oh, this is really interesting. 100% of patients, all 9 of them, again, not that many, all 9 female patients, 11 total, all 9 female, 100% of female patients reported menstrual irregularities consisting of either missed or irregular cycles. Look at that. Isn't that fascinating? All 9 female patients reported menstrual irregularities. Again, small study. I recognize that's a limitation, major limitation, but that's 100% of the female patients had menstrual problems on keto. Side effects influence the acceptability of the diet in our patients. However, seizure frequency is reduced, then better compliance. Yes. But yeah, again, all female patients reported menstrual irregularities, such as missed periods or altered cycles. This is not uncommon, considering that menstrual irregularities are reported in other high ketone states, such as starvation. Starvation is a high ketone state. Your body manufactures ketones while you are starving, right? So again, remember, we are mimicking starving, mimicking fasting. Fasting is a high stress state that has massively negative effects on the reproductive system. Your body has been built to detect whether or not you have repletion of food, whether or not you're in a safe environment. This is very important. If you want to know the reason that keto affects women so much worse than men and why men handle keto better than women, this is why. The female endocrine system is much pickier than the male system, right? Because the female has to actually hold a child for 9 months, whereas all the male has to do is donate sperm, right? So really, and there's no assumption in nature that the male is going to stick around, even though obviously we have conventions like marriage and things like that, right? So what's important to know is the female endocrine system is much pickier about whether or not there's enough food, whether or not we're in a stressful environment with a lot of threats. So stress hormones go up when there are predators. Stress hormones go up when there's not enough food. Stress hormones counteract sex hormones, and they do the opposite. Let me say that one more time. Stress hormones and sex hormones are exactly antithetical to each other. And remember, keto is mimicking a fasting state. So do we have evidence that keto could potentially be bad for fertility and for female hormones? Well, lack of regulation of the menstrual cycle, that certainly seems like pretty good evidence. What else we got? The ketogenic diet, adolescents can do it too. Yes, here we go. All right, what do we got? Again, 2003 study, not a super huge study, 45 patients, 12 to 19 years old. Menstrual dysfunction, 45% of female subjects were the most commonly reported side effects. Now remember, the last study had 100% of females, but this study had patients aged 12 to 19 years. It's very possible that the only reason that only 45% of the women in this study had menstrual problems is because some of them were literally not old enough to be menstruating yet. Yeah. So what do we got here? Ooh, this is interesting. 45% of the girls reported menstrual problems while on the diet, specifically amenorrhea, 6 out of them, and delayed puberty, 3. Delayed puberty. That's right. When you are in a fasting type state, it can delay puberty. Yeah. Now, what's the logic there? Again, your body, your biology is designed to optimize survival. So it has ways, your nervous system and the connection between your nervous system and the gonads and reproductive system in general, it is exquisitely sensitive to whether or not the environment is suitable for holding a child in the womb for 9 months. An environment with very few predators and lots of food is highly, highly suitable for pregnancy, right? An environment without enough food, right? There's a fasting physiology being mimicked by keto. Ketones only happen when the body thinks it's starving. You don't manufacture ketones unless the body thinks it's starving. So keto is telling your body that you're in an environment where there isn't sufficient food. No wonder you have delayed onset of puberty and menstrual irregularities on keto. One adolescent began hormonal therapy to induce menses. So one girl had to actually take hormones to finally start her period, even though she was old enough to have one. 8 experienced a return of normal. 8 experienced a return of normal menses after diet discontinuation. So here we go. I don't know if you can see that or not, but long story short, whenever they stopped the ketogenic diet, their menstrual periods were normalized, and they again had normal hormones. So their hormones being super jacked up. All right, so what is next? I told you guys I was going after it. I told you guys I was going to get crunk. That's why I call it the dark side of keto. It does have a freaking dark side, and people need to know about it. All right, here we go. What do we got? So we're going to get a little technical, a little more technical here. Little more technical. Oh boy, what do we got? Okay, so let's do these cortisol studies next. Here we go. Bam! Dietary macronutrient content alters cortisol metabolism independently of body weight changes in obese men. This was a 4-week study done in, when was this one done? 2007, not the newest study. Conclusion, a low carbohydrate diet alters cortisol metabolism independently of weight loss. In obese men, this enhances cortisol regeneration and reduces cortisol inactivation in the liver. More technical stuff. Alterations in cortisol metabolism may be a consequence of macronutrient dietary content and may mediate effects of diet on metabolic health. So let's check out some discussion and some graphs here. How about that? These data show for the first time that chronic manipulation of dietary macronutrient composition meaning essentially low carb, high fat, influences glucocorticoid metabolism in humans. Glucocorticoid is that's cortisol, stress hormones. In obese men, a high-fat diet increased regeneration of cortisol and reduced the rate of inactivation of cortisol. Let's see here. And the medium carb, more normal diet induced weight loss, substantial weight loss without increasing cortisol. The effect of the high-fat diet was already apparent within 1 week of the diet when the weight loss was still minimal. And here are some graphs here. Rate of appearance of cortisol. The one that's highlighted is the high-fat diet. The black bar is the high-fat diet. MFMC, that's medium fat, medium carb, more of a normal diet. And you can see that we have basically significantly higher cortisol levels in the high-fat, low-carb diet. Now, I do have to give a quick caveat here. One thing that's really important to know, and I'm going to try to review this at the end if I can. When we say high-fat, low-carb, et cetera, a lot of these diets are not technically ketogenic diets because they don't take the fats down, or they don't take the carbs down low enough to induce ketosis. So sometimes when they say high-fat, low-carb, they mean pretty low carb, but maybe not like 4% low carb. You know what I mean? So we do have to take this with a grain of salt. Super duper low carb keto is not the same as just somewhat low carb. They're not the identical thing. So there's a lot we can extrapolate from these, but if it's not a full blown ketogenic diet, then it may not totally apply. So I do have to just be epistemologically honest about that. All right. So here's another cortisol study. June 2012, published in JAMA. Here we go. Effects of dietary composition during weight loss maintenance, a controlled feeding study. Remember what a controlled feeding study is? It's where they basically put you in a metabolic ward. They control everything you eat. You don't get to not finish your plate. Everything is finely calculated, exact number of grams of everything, of calories, etc. This is a 4-week study. And here's what they say. Participants consumed a low-fat diet or a low-carb diet. They actually did both for 4 weeks. They switched. And, what happened here? What happened to their cortisol levels? Let's see. Okay, cortisol excretion was measured via the urine. The very low-carb diet, the cortisol averaged 71, whereas the low-fat diet, the cortisol averaged 50. So significantly higher cortisol on the low-carb diet. Again, cortisol, stress hormone, as we know, right? Let's see here. Let's say, should probably move on here in a second, but I got one more interesting thing from this study. 24-hour urinary cortisol excretion, a hormone measure of stress, was highest with the very low-carb diet. Consistent with this finding, Stimson et al. Reported increased whole body regeneration. That's the study we just talked about. Now, here's what's interesting. They're talking about cardiovascular risk. We'll get into the heart stuff in a little bit. The research on keto being bad for the heart is kind of mixed. Some of it says it might not be that bad. Others says that it probably is, to be honest. Yeah. So people with the highest levels of cortisol in some studies have a 5-fold higher risk of cardiovascular mortality. So just know that high cortisol is strongly associated with cardiovascular disease and death from cardiovascular problems like heart attacks. Alrighty then. So, and remember also, these stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, they're very rough on the heart. They make it do things that it shouldn't be doing while you're at rest. They make it beat harder and faster. So something we know about. All right. So let's talk about stress and fertility here. Glucocorticoid, stress and fertility. Glucocorticoid is a fancy term for, let's just call it cortisol. There's other ones out there too. But recognize that cortisol does have major effects on blood sugar. That's why it's called a glucocorticoid. CORT, C-O-R-T, just refers to the adrenal glands, the adrenal cortex. That's where these hormones come from. All right. What do we got? Stress and elevated cortisol can also inhibit reproduction. Glucocorticoids, aka cortisol, affect gonad function at multiple levels in the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. These are two parts of your brain, hypothalamus, pituitary, and then gonads just meaning, your whole all your reproductive organs, whether you're male or female, right? Testes, ovaries, etc. Glucocorticoids affect gonadal function at multiple levels. The hypothalamus decreases the synthesis of something called GnRH. We're going to get into gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRH, in a second. Let's see what else we got. Also, the pituitary gland, release of FSH and LH, luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone. What these guys do is these guys basically talk to the rest of your body. They talk to the gonads, and they help to produce sperm, eggs. They regulate fertility. They regulate all your sex hormones, your testosterone, estrogen, etc. And let's see, maternal exposure to prenatal stress or glucocorticoids can lead to permanent modification of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal function in offspring. That's pretty crazy, right? So yes, we do have ample scientific evidence that shows that higher levels of stress hormones negatively affect fertility. All right, now, GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone. Regulation of gonadotropin releasing hormone neurons by glucose. So, what does GnRH do? Trust me, I know this is a lot, so thanks for bearing with me, guys. All right, GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone. It tells the brain, pituitary, to release these other hormones called FSH and LH. So this thing tells your brain to make these things, and then these things basically control your entire reproductive system. FSH, LH, again, control all reproductive systems. That controls menstruation, ovulation, controls sperm production, all that stuff, right? All your sex hormones. This is all your whole way that your brain tells your glands and your gonads to regulate fertility is all based on gonadotropin releasing hormone. So what does this 2011 study from the University of Pennsylvania say? It says circulating glucose levels regulate GnRH release and may in part mediate the effects of negative energy balance on fertility. Circulating glucose levels regulate GnRH release and may in part mediate the effects of negative energy balance on fertility. Negative energy balance just basically meaning like your body thinks you're starving. GnRH neurons may directly sense changes in glucose availability by a mechanism involving blah, 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 and PK. Too much detail. GnRH neurons comprise the final common pathway in which the brain controls reproduction. Yeah. So basically what this paper is saying, distilled down, is that the amount of glucose in your blood, the amount of carbs coming into your body, actually has a massive effect on all of your hormones. Yeah, all of your hormones. So, yeah. Now let's talk about, for a second, this guy named Sean Baker. Just a funny little aside here. And remember, also really fast, stress is antithetical to fertility. Just know that your cortisol, your stress hormones over here, and then your reproductive hormones over here, your testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, they are completely opposite to each other. So in the literature, when you actually look at the research, what's happening is you're seeing a ratio of stress hormones to sex hormones. Just think of it as very, very simply this reproductive stress axis, this sort of relationship between how much stress your body is under and how well your body can how suitable your body is for reproductive behavior. And again, remember, this is especially true of women. This is the reason I believe that women do much more poorly on keto than men. Also, notice that the vast majority of the proponents of keto are males. It's about a 90% dude kind of thing in my experience. Anyway, so yeah, we already have enough fertility crisis. I really do honestly believe that the low carb craze is one of the things fueling the fertility crisis. But I do have to say, to be honest, we don't have enough research specifically looking at the ketogenic diet on fertility. I looked for it. I found not nearly enough. So I just have to be honest. We need way more research in this area to know for sure. But the mechanism of action is clear. Increased cortisol suppresses gonadotropin releasing hormone, which then suppresses FSH and LH, which then reduces or causes imbalances in various reproductive hormones like testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. All right. So this guy, Sean Baker. Sean Baker is a physician who is also a carnivore. He's one of these dudes who like literally only eats meat, which is a funny, interesting. I mean, we live in very weird times, right? Where something that's basically an eating disorder is actually considered a legitimate diet. But anyway, not that I have any strong opinions on that, but he's a physician. He, he decided that it would be a good idea to just only eat meat and nothing else. And the dude works out a lot. He's super jacked and he's obviously in good shape. Probably the reason he's so healthy is because he works out so much. Because you can eat kind of garbage, and if you work out a ton, like you're probably going to actually be pretty healthy. You can get away with, by the way, you can get away with murder if you work out 24/7. And if you don't have other chronic diseases, if you're relatively healthy, you can do really well. But anyway, this guy, Sean Baker, he actually shared his labs after he had been doing the carnivore diet for a while. And here's what's fascinating. This dude actually had low testosterone doing carnivore. So remember, carnivore is, very, very, very low carbohydrate because you're not exactly getting carbs in meat, right? Just all fat and all protein. And so he actually was brave enough to publish his labs on his website. These are Sean Baker's actual labs published on his website. Low testosterone, 237, range, low end of the range is 264. Free testosterone was 5.5. Low end of the range was 7.2. So yeah, this guy needs some help. I'm surprised that he was brave enough to actually publish these. His LDL cholesterol was also elevated. Remember, this is carnivore diet, an extreme example of an ultra high fat, low carb diet. And his hemoglobin A1C, a measure of the average 2-3 months of your blood sugar, was also elevated 6.3, and the upper end was 5.6. So according to conventional medical logic, Dr. Baker's was actually pre-diabetic. Pre-diabetic, yeah. His fasting glucose was also elevated as well. And this was, I think, after about a year-ish, I want to say, don't quote me on that, but around a year doing carnivore. So, so he was pre-diabetic. Now, how do you get pre-diabetic on a low-carb diet? Well, let's just put it this way. We talked earlier about the fact that fat, high amounts of fat, and there's no higher fat diet than eating nothing but beef all day. High amounts of fat, they wreck your carbohydrate tolerance, your insulin sensitivity. So that, I'm sure that's a factor, but still it's pretty bizarre that happened. Pretty bizarre. Yeah. So yes, keto makes absolutely no sense if you actually want to have healthy hormones. It's just kind of insane, to be honest. And I will say, though, to be frank, like there still needs to be a lot more research in here. So perhaps this effect is not as severe as I think it is. But what I will tell you, again, just from personal clinical experience, most of my clients happen to be female for whatever reason, and keto is much worse for women than men. Much worse. Men tends to their systems tend to be not as carbohydrate sensitive. The female endocrine system is much more carbohydrate sensitive. Yeah. All right. So what do we got next? Heart and mortality. I'm going to start speeding up here because it's getting pretty long and I don't want to go too crazy, but let's just talk a little bit about this. I will say in my review of the literature, there is some literature showing that that, blood pressure is not negatively affected by keto. We also do know that whenever you lose weight, just the act of losing weight can reduce your cardiovascular mortality. And so, but the question is, if you were to lose weight via keto or lose weight in a healthier way, which would have the better outcome for cardiovascular risk profile? And I would argue it would obviously be the latter. It's just pretty clear. But again, we don't know 100%. There needs to be more research in that area, to be frank. One way of measuring cardiovascular risk is something called flow-mediated dilation, FMD. Benefit of low-fat over low-carbohydrate diet on endothelial health and obesity. This is a study from 2008 where they used this technique called flow-mediated dilation. FMD, flow-mediated dilation, is just basically looking at the way that your brachial artery here, it uses ultrasound. It looks at the brachial artery. It looks at the way that it dilates whenever you cut the blood flow off first by compressing it, and then you let go. And when you let go, you use an ultrasound machine to look at the width, the dilation response of the artery. This is a scientific, non-invasive way that they're able to infer the health of your cardiovascular system. And we have multiple studies showing that higher fat diets impair flow-mediated dilation. Weight loss was similar in low fat and low carb diets. Blood pressure decreased similarly in both groups. So fascinating that the blood pressure actually did decrease in the keto, or the low carb, not keto. The percentage of flow-mediated dilation improved in the low fat, but not the low carb. So basically, even though they lost the same amount of weight, the low fat group had an improvement in their cardiovascular risk, but the low carb did not. Let's see here. At 6 weeks, flow-mediated dilation in subjects on the low-carb diet was actually reduced. It actually got worse at the 6-week mark. Yeah. And let's see what else we got. The authors here note also that the acute effects of even a single high-fat meal last 6 hours after ingestion. They're referring to the negative effects on the cardiovascular system. Very important to know that the fat density of the meal, how much fat is in the meal, and the kinds of fat, again, especially saturated fat from animals. Saying this is a non-vegan can actually impair blood flow. And essentially, in a very basic way, it actually thickens your blood. Fat thickens the blood, makes the blood more resistant to flow. It increases blood viscosity in a sense, right? So that makes total sense that you would have a decrease in some of these parameters. Here's another one. Negative effect of low carbohydrate, high protein, high fat diet on small peripheral artery activity in patients with increased cardiovascular risk. And I'm going to read that one. Just more of the same. Hopefully I'm not boring you guys too much. We do have a couple studies on mortality. I don't like these studies as much, to be honest. But again, just remember, quick caveat, a lot of these studies are on low carbohydrate diets. That's not the same as a ketogenic diet. And some of these studies are just kind of like just asking questions, just observing. They're not actually intervening. They're observational studies, so they're not the best. But this particular one did say low carbohydrate diets were associated with a significantly higher risk of all-cause mortality, but oddly enough, not associated with a risk of cardiovascular mortality. So, but yeah, all-cause mortality increased on a low-carb diet, according to this. Again, not a perfect study, but still interesting. It was a meta-analysis, so they did look at 17 different studies and compiled them all into one meta-analysis. Also, if you're going to do keto, do as little meat as possible or do no meat keto. There is evidence to show that the negative effects of a low-carb diet on mortality and the heart are actually abolished by just not eating meat and getting lots of fat from plants. So it says right here, adherence to a low-carb diet rich in animal sources was associated with higher all-cause and cardiovascular mortality. An increase in adherence to an animal-based low-carb diet was associated with higher all-cause mortality, blah, blah, blah. An increase in adherence to a plant-based low-carb, high-fat diet, however, was not associated with all-cause or cardiovascular mortality. So yeah. Anyway, that's interesting. And one more right here. There we go. Both high and low percentages of carbohydrate diets were associated with increased mortality, which is interesting. A little different results here, with minimal risk observed at 50-55% carbohydrate intake. Low carb dietary patterns favoring animal-derived sources of fat and protein, such as chicken, beef, pork, lamb, were associated with higher mortality, whereas those that favored plant-derived protein and fat intake from vegetables, nuts, peanut butter, etc., were associated with lower mortality, suggesting that the source of food notably modifies the association between carbohydrate intake and mortality. So basically, if you're going to do low carb, do it without meat or with as little meat as possible, and then you will probably not suffer as much. But in general, don't do low carb really at all, because it's just not all that great. And it's just probably, hopefully it's getting less popular, I should hope. Anyway, all right, so we're going to do the Q&A in a second. I have one last little nugget for you guys right here. This is fascinating. You guys know I'm obsessed with glutathione. It's kind of my thing. And I do have a couple of videos in the playlist that I made from Dr. Chris Masterjohn. Actually, one of them is from Masterjohn. Another one's from somebody else, talking about these two studies on the ketogenic diet and glutathione. And I thought this was fascinating. Both the studies, one of the chief researchers was named Julie Milder. I think it's Milder pronounced. And check this out. Okay, so we have this first study. The ketogenic diet increases mitochondrial glutathione levels. Well, that sounds really fascinating. That sounds really interesting. So it looks like doing a ketogenic diet can boost glutathione. That sounds awesome. So what happened? This was 2008. So basically what happened is they did, this was a rat study, and they were given either a keto diet or a regular diet for 3 weeks. They did confirm they were in ketosis, and they saw a 2-fold increase in glutathione in the mitochondria of the hippocampus, a part of the brain that's associated with memory function. So together, the results demonstrate that the ketogenic diet upregulates glutathione synthesis, enhances mitochondrial antioxidant status, and protects mitochondrial DNA from free radicals. So that sounds great. Dr. David Perlmutter, who is an advocate of keto, did a video on YouTube talking about this study and how keto boosts glutathione. Now, let's look at a follow-up study, though, here from 2 years after. This one is called Acute Oxidative Stress and Systemic NRF2 Activation by the Ketogenic Diet. Same chief researcher, Julie Milder. By the way, Dr. Milder, she actually works with epilepsy. So the reason she's studying the ketogenic diet is because she's prescribing it, or not prescribing, she's not a medical doctor, but because she is interested in epilepsy research and using keto to treat epilepsy. This piece of research literally says the opposite of her research from 2 years earlier, though, and this is fascinating. Okay, recently we showed that the ketogenic diet increased glutathione. Here we report that rats consuming the ketogenic diet showed acute production of H2O2, which is peroxide type molecule, a very nasty free radical. So the ketogenic diet increased free radical production in the hippocampus, as well as production of another very nasty compound called 4-HNE. And what does it say? They also found increased glutathione, but they found massive depletion of glutathione in the liver. Yeah, what's going on here? Well, this is really interesting. So track with me here. A profound depletion of tissue, of liver tissue glutathione was found. So here's what actually happened. And the video and the playlist from Dr. Chris Masterjohn explains what really happened. So glutathione synthesis is dependent on carbohydrates coming into the body. When your body is in a fed state, interpreted by carbohydrates coming in, it switches on glutathione production. When your body is in a fasting state, it downregulates glutathione production. That's a fact. The only reason that the glutathione in this one part of this rat's brain increased was because the ketogenic diet led to a massive production of free radicals. So the ketogenic diet was causing brain damage in the rats, essentially, specifically rat hippocampus mitochondria, or was creating free radicals with the capacity to create brain damage. And then the brain had to respond by massively increasing glutathione production. But what happened eventually was, author's words, not mine. Eventually, what happened on the ketogenic diet for these poor rats, a profound depletion of liver tissue GSH, that's glutathione. Profound depletion. Strangely enough, they also said improved mitochondrial antioxidant capacity. I wouldn't call it improved. I'd say the mitochondria were responding to a poison by generating more glutathione. But eventually, the rats' livers completely ran out of glutathione, and they couldn't even keep up with the demand from the free radical damage induced by the ketogenic diet. So that's all the studies I have for today. Are you guys totally worn out by now? Oh my God, that was crazy. All right, so we're gonna, real quick here, do a couple things. We obviously have to give away some prizes. Let's do the prizes and the Q&A at the same time here. I know we don't have too many people tuned in right now, which means you guys have great odds. Of course, it is double prize Friday. So real quick, I'm going to start the timer. You have 1 minute to get a 2-digit number in for prize number one. Prize number one is, of course, 2 of any CHOQ product. The timer has begun. And while you're getting those numbers in, with the timer running right now, feel free to fire away with questions. What do you guys got? We've got about 15 minutes before I have to rest, because, man, this has been a real intense day with all this preparation for this stuff and talking for this long. But anyway, yeah, I know it wasn't as much fun as perhaps Stay Human and a lot more technical, but I think this information needed to get out there. So, but yeah, throw your questions at me. Also, may the force be with you. Maybe I should get back on this guitar really fast here while we're giving away prizes. Yeah, let's do that. All right. Oh, yeah, there we go. All right, cool. Okay, we are done. Okay, what have we got? So the randomly generated number is 32. Who is closest to 32? You guys help me. I'm almost brain dead after all this research today. I've got a pile of studies on the ground. 32. Who is closest to 32? Let's see. EMP has 19. Wow, nobody's super close. I don't see anybody in the 30s. So 32 minus 19, that is what? 13. 32, that is. So Aswana has 47. Aswana is 15 away. Aswana, are you the winner? Let's see. So 47 minus 32 is 15. Yes, Aswana, you are the winner. Wow, Aswana, you've won quite a few times, seems like. That's awesome. Very cool. Good for you. And today is double prize day. So again, you do win 2 of any CHOQ product. All right. So congratulations, Iswana. You did win 2 of any CHOQ products. You know what to do. You've won before. Congratulations. And let's just do prize number 2 right now. Let's get out of the way. One more time. One more time here. 32. Wait, hold on. I'm sorry. Did we mess up? Did I mess up there? Hold on 1 second. So the number was 32. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. You know what? EMP, you also won, didn't you? No, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. Sorry, totally brain dead here. So EMP, I'm going to say that you guys both won. Let's just make it easy. I don't want to take a prize back from Iswana. So EMP, you did win prize number 1, but Iswana, I'm just going to give you prize number 2 because I hate to take stuff away from people. So EMP, you won prize number 1, which is 2 of any CHOQ product. Iswana, you win prize number 2, which is 1 of any CHOQ product, 1 shirt, and 1 cacao beans. And let me just let our customer service folks know right now what's going on. Yes, let's just do it that way. Very sorry about that, EMP. My mistake. You are the official winner, though. So, yeah, let's just make sure that our folks know that. MP won prize 1, and Iswana prize 2. Double prize day. All right, cool. There we go. So, all right. Sorry about that, Iswana, but hey, you know what? Even though you didn't win, you ended up winning, so pretty awesome. My mistake ended up being your benefit. So, yeah. All right, so got the prizes out of the way, and I'm sure whoever watches this later will be like, you know what? That guy's nuts. He plays guitar, doesn't take himself seriously. I'm not going to listen to anything he says. But hopefully the massive number of studies that I just went through was helpful. Yes. Thanks, Hunter. Appreciate it. Yeah. All right. So do you guys have questions for me? Ask me anything. What do you want to know about? Obviously, anything that's legal for me to answer. And remember, of course, I'm not here to treat disease or act as any kind of medical consultant, right? So let's just get that, disclaimer. So you guys start throwing questions at me, and I'll try to play the Imperial Death March on guitar one more time. Here, let's see what happens. All right, that was fun. Played it slightly better that time. Okay, just wanted to give you guys some music while you were coming up with your questions there. I was slightly less sloppy that time. All right, what do we got here? What do we got? And you know what? I am going to actually set a timer for this section because I don't want to go too long. So we're going to give this, let's give this 10 minutes. 10 minutes, guys. And we will, then we'll be finished up here. So throw all your questions at me, and I will rapid fire go through as many as I possibly can in the next 10 minutes, and then I will call it a night and start the weekend. What do we got here? Okay. Thank you again, Hunter. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you guys stuck around for the end. The difference in sugar carbs like an apple versus whole grain carbs like healthy bread, how this affects cell function. Abigail, the most important thing to know is you want to avoid refined carbohydrates. You want to avoid high fructose corn syrup and sugar and junk like that. You want to avoid refined grains, and anything else is great. I will say in general, fruit is really one of the most healing things you can put in your body. So fruit, to me as a practitioner, is one of the most essential healing foods on the planet. It's also one of the reasons that I'm not the biggest fan of keto, because fruit is literally the single most healing thing you can put in your body, and you can't eat fruit on keto. So yeah. All right. Shamsul, I cannot answer that question. Let's see. What types of amount of fats are beneficial? JJ. So the fat conversation is very, very complex. So let me see if I can distill down what's going on with the whole fat thing. So you have many different distinct molecular types of fats. You have saturated, you have unsaturated, then out of the unsaturated, you have mono and polyunsaturated, and then out of the different kinds of polyunsaturated, you have the omega-3s and omega-6s, and it gets really, really crazy, really fast. What I will say is that the paleo folks have identified that excessive amounts of omega-6 polyunsaturated fats in the form of linolenic acid, LA, can be pro-inflammatory and not so great. So some of these vegetable oils that have too much omega-6 are not good. And also any fat that has been highly processed, so some of the oils that I recommend avoiding or minimizing as much as possible are like canola, peanut oil, soybean oil, corn oil, things like that. Saturated fat, that's complicated as well. The keto paleo people seem to think that saturated fat can do no harm. But of course, we know from the research that I went through that saturated fat, especially when it's from an animal source, tends to really negatively affect metabolism and mitochondrial function, and can really affect your insulin sensitivity in a bad way. So saturated fat you do want to be careful with. And again, the saturated fat that typically comes from animals is significantly worse. So reducing animal protein to where it's not excessive is important. Again, not advocating veganism. I'm not vegan, but saying that people just need to eat less freaking meat. Yes, omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids, very, very important. Preferably the EPA and DHA, which are the final form of omega-3, versus their precursor, which is called ALA. So long chain versus short chain, you want to go with the EPA, DHA. Those are anti-inflammatory. So foods that do have those are helpful. Supposedly one advantage, this comes from the paleo keto people, one advantage of eating certain kinds of animal tissues is that you're going to get your omega-3s in a direct form, EPA, DHA, such as, for example, wild-caught salmon, right? However, when you get omega-3s from plants, you're getting them in a precursor form called alpha-linolenic acid that your body has to convert to EPA and DHA, and it is much weaker. There's an enzyme that converts that called delta-6 desaturase, D6D, and that enzyme is not very efficient, and in some people it converts very poorly. So that could potentially be argued as one reason that there is an advantage if you do eat some meat. It's also one of the reasons that I am more pescatarian and eat non-fish meat on a much more rare basis personally. But of course, you can get plenty of omegas being a vegan. There's lots of ways to do that. Doesn't mean that you have to eat meat at all. So anyway, that's the best I can do. That's a very long conversation, JJ. EMP says, what would cause cholesterol to decrease on keto? And by the way, guys, keep throwing these questions up. We only have 5 or 6 more minutes, so keep throwing them up if you have any questions. What would cause cholesterol to decrease on keto? So EMP, I have to first explain that that question is much more complex than you might realize, because there are many different kinds of cholesterol. The older way of looking at cholesterol, it's being phased out because it's too simplistic, is to think of HDL as good and LDL less bad. And there's some reality to that. But here's the problem. There are other labs that can differentiate different kinds of LDL and different kinds of HDL. And according to their research, there's certain kinds of LDL that are good and certain kinds that are bad. By good and bad, I mean associated with cardiovascular mortality. And it's just all over the freaking place. So, there's different ways to calculate your ratio of HDL to LDL or a ratio of HDL triglycerides, and different schools of thought on that. So this is called lipidology. And let's just say that anyone who's actually really just dove headfirst into lipidology realize it's not as simple as we think it is. But in general, if somebody has super high LDL and super low HDL and super high triglycerides, that's probably pretty bad, most likely. We could probably infer that. But yes, why would something cause cholesterol decrease on keto? It's complicated. It depends on which kind of cholesterol you're talking about. Yeah. I don't know. I haven't seen studies showing that keto massively decreases cholesterol per se. Although again, if you're decreasing HDL, that's not a good thing. So it depends on if you're talking about HDL, LDL, and then of course the caveats I mentioned about the complexity of the different kinds of HDL and LDL. Yeah. So sorry if I couldn't answer that question better. It's more complex than we think. My preferred source of protein, Abigail. I advocate eating much less meat for most people. So I eat meat typically once per day, and then I also skip some days. So I think the ideal number of times per week to eat meat is somewhere between 3 and 6, maybe 3 to 5. I don't know. Like I try to eat meat no more than 7 times per week, averaging once a day. But yeah, and of course, theoretically, according to some metrics, meat is the ultimate protein. I actually do not agree with that at all. I think that you can get plenty of protein from plants, that vegans are fine when it comes to protein. I think that Americans are obsessed with protein. So I will say, though, for me, my favorite source of animal protein is wild-caught salmon. And my single favorite source of plant-based protein is hemp seeds. Hemp is fantastic. Hemp has a rare omega-6 that helps to reduce inflammation called GLA. Most omega-6s we get are pro-inflammatory. GLA is anti. But yeah, I personally don't worry about protein. I've never worried about protein. Protein's the last thing that I care about. And it's probably the last thing you should care about if you care about your health. It's literally the single least important thing out of everything in nutrition is protein. It really is. There's nothing less important than protein at all. Unless you were a bodybuilder, there is no single macronutrient that should be less on your radar and you should care less about than protein. It has been drastically overemphasized, and it's absolutely insane how much we care about protein. It's just completely not on my radar at all, and it shouldn't be on yours unless you're actually trying to be a bodybuilder. That's the only time you should really even remotely care about protein, I think, personally. But anyway, that's just my opinion, and of course I go a little against the grain there because, yeah. What were Sean Baker's triglyceride levels? I have it on a giant pile somewhere on the floor right now. I'm not going to find it because as I did each study, I just threw it down. I don't recall what his triglyceride levels were. If they were elevated, it wouldn't surprise me, but who knows? Let's see. JJ says, thank you for teaching. Thank you, JJ, for being here. Abigail says, you sound more intelligent than any of my doctors. Well, that's very flattering. Thank you, Abigail. I appreciate that. I'm going to finish up here. Looks like we don't have any more questions. And just wanted to say thank you guys for all being here. You guys are fantastic. You're super awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. This was a real tour de force, as they call it. It was interesting for me too, just, going through this much research. Of course, there's so much more I could do. You could do a whole, weekend seminar on this, really. I mean, 2 hours is not nearly enough to cover all the ground. And of course, there's hundreds more studies I probably could have looked at. So anyway, just want to say though, if you haven't given this video a like already, please do. I would love to also, if you can, if you wouldn't mind sharing this with any of your friends who would like to learn a bit more about keto. And of course, remember that you can, if you have any questions at all about the material in here or anything revolving around it, please ask me in the comments. Just say, hey, Choctor, or hey, Dr. Matt in the comments, and I will definitely answer your question in the order it was received whenever I get around to it. You guys are awesome. Appreciate you you hanging in there. Chocolala says, what kind of music do you play normally? I actually do play metal, interestingly enough. Yeah. In fact, you know what? Hey, let's just end. Let's end with a little bit of metal. How about that? How about that? All right, guys, signing off. Thanks for staying with me, sticking with me. This was ridiculous and fun. Much love to you guys, and I will see you next time. Stay human.